Wonderful. Well, it looks like the clock has struck 5 o'clock. We have our very own Cinderella story here. So instead of leaving the ball, we're going to begin the ball now. And welcome everyone to the first 2020 Ivy Insider episode.
Welcome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I'm very privileged to be here. My name is Peter Davos. I'm the founder and head of Hale Education. In the past, we have had the Ivy Insider event live, obviously in person in hotel ballrooms. And we featured a panel of some of our high achievers. Last year's panelists were accepted to MIT, Stanford, Penn, and many other universities. But obviously, due to COVID, we've also had to adapt. And we're going to host a series of webinars, with today being the first, featuring some of our high achieving students, but most importantly, their journeys, highlighting their journeys, their learning experiences, and hopefully learning from those as well, particularly if we have younger students that are Zooming in. So thank you everyone for joining. Just as an overview, Hale has a team of counselors, which is led by Angie, who's with us today. Angie has 20 years of experience, both as an admissions officer and as an educational consultant in East Asia. We're very privileged to have her on the team. She was Aadit's mentor and counselor. And we're joined obviously by the inimitable Aadit Palicha, who is going to be heading to Stanford, hopefully in September, if not. Shortly, as soon as the governor of California deems it safe for him to arrive. But thank you both for being here. Thank you for participating. And Angie and Aadit, I'm going to hand it over to you. Oh, just one more thing. If anyone has questions, please just input your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will get to the questions at the end of the presentation. I will call on the individuals who asked the question to ask them live, but please feel free to type them in that box, and that will help manage the process. Thank you, and Angie and Aadit, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Thank you, and thank you, Aadit, for joining us, because I've missed seeing you on my calendar. I've missed interacting with you. You're such an interesting person, and your story is one that really is exemplary. And I'm glad that you're able to spend some time with us today and agree to do so, because you are actually, even in a global pandemic, a very busy man. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few questions about this process. But the first one, of course, we're going to dust a question off from your college interview preparation times. And so, Aadit, please do tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I probably still have the answer memorized in my head from those like stressful interviews. But essentially, I know some of you might know me, I recognize the names, but my name is Aadit Palicha. I'm a graduating senior from GEMS Modern Academy, Dubai. And, like Peter and Angie said, I was lucky enough to be accepted into Stanford. But, throughout my high school career, I sort of focused on, besides academics, I focused on things like entrepreneurship, debate, political science, and sort of other aspects in those areas. And so, my high school journey has been focused on those areas, but also like we probably get into today, there were definitely some bumps in the road. But yeah.
So, one of the burning questions of students and parents, not just in Dubai, but the world over, especially of high school age students, what does a Stanford student's profile actually look like? Right, and we know that your test scores look like what you would expect them to. They were nice. There's nothing to sneeze that. You are achieved academically, but you actually have a story in both your academic profile and your extracurricular profile. Would you share a little bit more, a fuller picture of what learning was like for you in school first?
Right. So, and yeah, like you said, in terms of the profile for like a Stanford student or Ivy League student is definitely like about the story, and it's not just about what you've accomplished specifically, this extracurricular. It's about whether you can really convey a story about yourself that convinces an admissions officer that you are genuinely dedicated to furthering your learning career at the university. But so, like, addressing a question about, how learning was like, if I'm not wrong, like learning was like in school for me. It definitely wasn't a straight shoot process. I know at the end of it, we like to look back and say, oh, he was always an A+ student, he was always a perfect scorer. But that sort of wasn't my journey, and I know that's not the journey for a lot of people who get accepted in these top universities. Actually, for my first 2 years of high school, I wasn't that academically achieved. I struggled a little bit in the curriculum that I was in, and I think those first 2 years, although they weren't really academically all that exemplary, they definitely helped me pick up the pace when it came to my last 2 years of high school. And definitely learning in that respect learning through that process was very beneficial, because it wasn't about the valedictorians or the 1,500 plus SATs. It was more about the determination to not resign yourself to mediocrity after one bad year or after 2 bad years. And so I'm sure there are definitely a few students out there listening who may be thinking, I might not have the grades for this. Well, there's always an opportunity to pick yourself up, and taking that initiative is in and of itself a large academic leap that any admissions officer would appreciate.
Recognize, and that's the absolute truth. So not only did you kick it into gear academically, once you kind of like found your footing and direction, outside of class, you've also challenged yourself to grow and share things important to you in an ever-growing sphere of influence. Talk to us about some of the things that you've done outside of class that have really added to your life and learning and this journey that you've been on the last 4 years.
Yeah, so like I said, one of the biggest things I did outside the classroom, outside academics, was entrepreneurship. So I have experience building startups, and I think sort of the biggest cloud, or like the biggest journey throughout high school, was a startup called GoPool. Essentially, to summarize it, it's like a carpooling startup for parents in Dubai. And building that app, sort of from ideation to fundraising to app development, and then eventually to like marketing and promotion, that was one of the biggest journeys throughout my high school life that really not only helped me grow as a person, but also helped me reflect on some of the things I wanted myself to be, some of the characteristics I wanted to display in a college application and beyond. And so entrepreneurship definitely, and GoPool specifically, was one solid journey that I worked on. But other than that, I had one more consistent theme throughout high school was debate. And so I've been debating since I was in grade 7, so like 5 years or 6 years now. And I challenged myself every year to pick up the pace, where I started with, school competitions, and then I went to state level competitions, and then eventually nationally and internationally. And so that was my journey with debate. And so this year, obviously the tournament is not happening because of COVID-19, but I was lucky enough to be selected for the UAE national debate team. And that was also, a massive culmination of like 4 years of multiple years of like practice and developing that skill. So yeah, those are some of the things that beyond academics are some things that I pursued.
And audience, he's also being a little bit modest because GoPool is just one of 3 startups that he's created. Just tell us a little bit about privacy in your think tank.
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk a little bit about privacy first. And so way back now I'm saying, but like, I guess last year, during my second last year of high school, so grade 11, I was selected to attend a entrepreneurship summer program at MIT. And so obviously, like, that in and of itself was a whole application process, like a mini preparatory application process. But throughout that journey, it was not really for the prestige of going to that summer program. What I really benefited was the perspective that that summer program gave to me in terms of on entrepreneurship. And as a result of that summer program, I met, 2-3 really smart kids, and we decided to build a startup that we were passionate about. And we particularly wanted to solve data privacy issues. We wanted to make privacy policies more accessible. We wanted to help people gain control of their personal data online. And so we started a startup called Privacy, spelled Privasee. And the startup was essentially an artificial intelligence algorithm that was designed to scan privacy policies and identify potential data risks before you sign up for a website. And we built that. We're still building that. Went through the whole startup process there. So that was another journey besides Gokul that I worked on. And also, like Angie mentioned, I worked on somewhat of a political startup because I had passion not only for entrepreneurship but also for policy and debate. And so I with some of my friends and a couple of mentors from the American University of Dubai, I started a think tank for high school students that helped them research policy initiatives, related to privacy and data protection and technology. And so that's something that I also worked on, I guess, beginning of the senior year of high school, and something that's, luckily grown more than I expected to. And so, yeah, so those are the three, like Gokul, Privacy, think tank, and debate, I guess, is like a good summary of what I presented myself as. Yeah.
And a small stamp with the Dubai Roadsters, which just always delights me to see at the bottom of your resume in cycling. So you had a journey, right? You were talking about your educational journey, going from struggling a little bit in a curriculum, trying to find your footing, to entering an IB program and taking more than the standard number of higher level courses, advocating for that rigor and that challenge, and performing quite well, to performing and learning significant amounts of things and bringing into the world significant amount of things. I mean, some of our listeners might actually have your app on their phone in life. And that's one of my favorite things about you is you just don't stop. When you have an idea, it can't just like rest in your hands. It has to come to life. Yeah, I'm very excited. You've got entrepreneur in your blood. But along this journey, right, we don't walk these kinds of journeys alone. What did you find that you needed the most help with along the way?
Right. And so, one of the big challenges that sort of, presented itself right at the front door was being thrust into an essay, like, working on essays sort of in a different way that I'd ever experienced before, college essays. And so I sort of viewed writing as this sort of eureka moment, it just comes to you and you just flow it and it's on paper and then you're done. And then here's your masterpiece. But what I sort of realized with college application essays is that it's a lot more of editing. It's a lot more paying attention to detail. And that was a process that I wasn't really familiar with. And so when I made my first draft, I'm like, this is my last draft. And so, adjusting to that process, training myself to present myself in a better way, articulate what I had in my head onto a piece of paper, that was very challenging for me, the editing process, the essay writing process. And so I think that's sort of the college application process. When I learned it and I learned that skill of essay editing, not only did it help me make better college application essays, but it's helping me right now with, a research paper and things like that. So that was definitely a challenge. One of the big challenges that I tried to overcome throughout this process.
Great. And yes, like the writing and editing process, it is a lot more involved than I think a lot of people understand. Do you remember how many drafts you wrote of your personal statement?
I think it was something like informally it was something like 11 or 12,
Yeah.
which is like mind blowing to 16-year-old version of myself who thought like, maximum 2 drafts, like it's just first draft and then like spell check and then that's it. That's what I thought at least. And so, yeah, the entire essay changes, and like when you're in that process, you'll see your essay and your thoughts being clearer and clearer by the draft. And that journey was challenging, but it was also extremely enriching. So yeah.
What was your favorite prompt? I mean, because of your school list, you didn't just get off easy with 0 supplements or 1 supplement. Stanford alone had 11 writing prompts. Right. So, of all the different prompts that you tackled in this last season, what was your favorite? What was your favorite one to write?
Sure. I think my favorite writing prompt, so I probably have a couple. I think one of my favorite writing prompts was definitely the University of Chicago creative essay. And so you get to pick any prompt you want. And so I picked the Where's Waldo prompt. And so it's literally just, where's Waldo? Write a 650-word essay. And so that was like a whole creative process in and of itself. That was definitely enjoyable. But other than the UChicago creative essay, I really enjoyed writing the Stanford roommate essay. And so, the prompt for that was write a letter to your future roommate, explaining, who you are and, what you care about. And so that essay was a lot of fun to write, and it really helped me reflect as a person, not as like a student or like an extracurricular person, but just as Aadit. And so, yeah, that was definitely a fun essay to write.
Yes. And what was the hardest prompt? What was the most difficult prompt for you?
Yeah. So I guess the most difficult prompt, the one I struggled with the most, was probably a fairly common one. It was, how will you contribute to our campus? If admitted to like Brown or University of Pennsylvania, how will you contribute to campus? And sort of why I struggled with that is because, the essay challenges you to extrapolate, your current interests, like not only reflect on your current interests and your passions and your talents, but also extrapolate that to an environment that you're not familiar with, especially as international students, because a lot of us don't have the luxury of like frequent visits to campus, and so it becomes very difficult to visualize yourself on campus and say, oh, I could contribute in this way, or maybe this passion of mine could lead to this contribution. And so I had difficulty with that visualization, but eventually it really, once you really do your research in terms of like the college that you're attending, and you do a little bit more introspection on your passions and your talents, it becomes easier. But definitely sort of like the most uphill battle was that essay.
Yeah. Speaking of uphill battles, right? The process wasn't as, not only was the essay process a little bit more stretched out and intense than you thought, so was the application season.
Right.
So what were some of the other challenges you faced during the application process that might not be visible as you stand here with your admit letter from Stanford? Right?
Yeah, so like you said, I guess at the end of the process, everybody just reflects and says, oh, like Stanford student, Yale student, like, this process was a cakewalk. They wrote a couple essays, they got accepted. There was not really like any anxiety or any tension for these like kids who get into top universities. But that actually wasn't the case. And I don't think that is the case generally. So I actually applied to a school early. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with, applying early to schools, early action, early decision. So I applied to the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, early decision. And I didn't get in then. I got deferred, which means that they sort of defer your final decision a few months. And so I was sort of stuck in limbo. And that was definitely a very difficult process for me because, I saw a lot of my high achieving friends getting accepted left, right, and center to like, some of them got into Wharton, some of them got into Yale, and some of them got into Columbia early. And so I sort of, that experience of not getting accepted at first was definitely a difficult one. And I remember having my family and I had a conversation with Peter, and he, just says, keep the faith, And Angie was in that room as well. So yeah, that was definitely a difficult process. There's a lot more rejection than some of us might expect, but that's okay, because at the end of the process, all you need is one good school, one school you really resonate with. And so yeah, definitely, even though at the 4 or 5 months later I ended up getting admitted to Wharton, uh, those 4 or 5 months were like agonizing. Like, just like stressful, you're anxious. Are you going to get in here? You got waitlisted at this university. You got waitlisted at that university. And so it's definitely common. But what I would say to students who are approaching this process, maybe as high school juniors right now, is that getting rejected or getting deferred or waitlisted or not getting accepted from a university doesn't mean that you'll get the same response at a similar university. It's all about where you fit, which school represents and aligns with your passions the most. And so although it's like, anxious, and it's difficult to sort of like take it from someone who luckily got out of this process well, but trust me, keep the faith. Remember that like a rejection from one school isn't a rejection from another school. And that was sort of the philosophy that Peter told me, and that was sort of the philosophy that helped me go through the very anxious application process, for sure.
Wow. So the strategy, hope, sweat, tears, anxiety, and all the work, right? You did a lot of work on these applications. All of that aside, what was the most meaningful part of the application process for you?
The most meaningful, so that's actually quite a difficult question. The most meaningful part of the application process, I guess I might have multiple. I'll start off with the reflection that I was, able to experience because of these essays. These essays are designed to challenge you. They're designed to make you think not only about the world around you, but about yourself as well. And so, this 4-month process where all you're doing is focusing on, not even 4, like, obviously it goes way beyond that as well. But, if there's 4 or 5 months where you're really in crunch time and you're working on your essays, it's definitely a slog, but it's also like, you realize that you learn a lot more about yourself in those few months. And that was definitely meaningful to me. But I think the most meaningful moment, I guess I would pinpoint, is somewhere maybe like 2-3 days before, those Ivy League decisions come out. And so those big decisions come out, and you're like, everybody's stressing, and everybody's like, I need to get into the school and things like that. I guess the most meaningful moment, maybe a few days before that day, was when I sort of came to this realization that an acceptance letter doesn't really define, your self-worth, and it doesn't really define or validate your achievements through high school. And it's always good to work hard towards it, and it's always a goal, and there's definitely ways to make that goal more likely. But then, at the end of the day, you never know what might happen. And so way before I got any of the acceptances that I was excited about, I sort of at least resigned to myself that regardless of what this process gave back to me, I would still look back at it positively, without animosity, and just appreciate the fact that I was able to go through high school with big aspirations, and hopefully, maybe even make it to one. And so that was a very meaningful moment for me, that realization, for sure.
Great. And so my last question for you is, what advice do you have for those younger students who are on this journey? Some of them just beginning, some of them just beginning the application season.
Right. I have like a whole sort of like volume of notes that I can like share with some of you. I guess some of the most important lessons that you'll hear as well, that I've heard from Andrew and I've heard from Peter and everybody else at Hale, is that it's, like I said sort of at the beginning, it's not about who has the flashiest extracurriculars or the perfect 1600 out of 1600. It's about who really has a genuine passion and a genuine commitment to what they want to pursue. And it's about a story that leads someone to believe that. And if you want to apply for, maybe like obviously if you want to pursue something in life, or if you're particularly interested in a certain field, then my biggest advice to you is to really make sure that you have your story. And that doesn't mean, incredible, world changing stories, but make sure you have your own story. Make sure it's not a generic story. It's a story that's unique to yourself. And it's a story that really conveys, and like a story that flows through your application, and a story that conveys to anyone reading your application and any admissions officer that, you as an individual, you're thinking deeply about things that not a lot of people think about. You're really committed to making tangible progress in things that you're interested in, and you're genuinely a student that would make a positive contribution to any campus, whether it's Harvard or any other school in the world. And so stay true to your story. Don't try to be someone else you're not, because I guess a lot of the times admissions officers see through that. Be yourself and be the best possible version of yourself. Sort of the best advice I would give you. And do like the SAT maybe 4 times. Yeah, definitely those are the things that I would say, at least the big one.
Yeah, the scores do help make it easy to say, a little easier to say, yes.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, a little easier.
a little bit easier. But I think, actually, I do have one more question, because when we just started like chatting when we were practicing beforehand with some of the technology and stuff, you'd mentioned that since you've been admitted and you're walking the tail end of the process, you got your I-20, and I'll be meeting about that.
Sure, yeah.
You've gotten to know your admissions officer.
Right.
And
yeah.
you've actually gotten to hear what they thought about your work. What were some of the insights that they gave you about what made you stand out among literally tens of thousands?
Yeah, so definitely, I guess something that admissions officers are sort of these like shadow creatures that nobody really knows. Nobody really knows what they look like or what they do and things like that. So that was sort of my perception as well. But like Andrew said, after I did get accepted into one of these universities, I was lucky enough to meet my admissions officer online and speak to him, and he was very open. And so he sort of told me what he really valued in my application and what made him so adamant to accept me. And so definitely some of the things that he really liked, and something that I touched upon a little earlier as well, is the fact that maybe my academics weren't as bulletproof in my first year and second year of high school, but the fact that I picked myself up and that that I really resolved myself to, even though I might not be on a path to greatness right now, to consciously make the decision to try finding that path. And he was more impressed by that resolve to succeed than he was impressed by the success itself. And so in his words, he was, it wasn't about the valedictorian or the good SAT score or the perfect grades that you had. It was about that resolve to get there that I saw visibly in your application, and that reflected. So that was definitely one thing that he really liked about my application. The other things he sort of mentioned were the fact that I was unabashedly myself. And so he could see that very clearly in the application, sort of in the humor I presented, in the way the stories I told. He could tell that there was no filter when it came to me presenting myself to him, and he really felt that authenticity, and like something that tens of thousands of applicants sort of forget is that in the midst of the 21st draft, and in the midst of your putting in your 10th extracurricular, the soul of what you're trying to portray and the authenticity sometimes dissolves, and that's too common than it should be. And so what he sort of pointed out to me is that in your application there was so much authenticity. It was so unabashedly you that it became difficult not to like you as a person. not to toot my own horn a little bit, but it was a lot easier to resonate with a person who's authentic on a piece of paper. And sort of the last thing that he mentioned was he really appreciated the initiative. I guess this is maybe a little Stanford specific, but he was very appreciative of the fact that, entrepreneurship and the self-starting nature of my application. He said, in his view, that's a fundamental facet of Stanford's personality and as a school, as an institution. And so that particularly stood out to him. And so what I sort of derived from that is that, there are different schools, they have different personalities, they value different characteristics. And, the schools that ended up getting accepted to, schools like Wharton and Stanford, they really tend to appreciate things like entrepreneurship. And so one of the big reasons I got in was because I was very clearly a Stanford person in terms of my personality and my interests. And so something I'd encourage all of you to do is when you're doing your college research process, whether you're in freshman year or you're just about to start, look deeply into a school's personality and really visualize whether you see yourself there. It's not about the school with the biggest name. It's about the school that has the environment that you could thrive the most in. And if you apply to those schools and you put in most of your effort into those schools, and you'll definitely find phenomenal schools that fit your personality, you have an exponentially greater chance of getting in. And so that's sort of the strategy that I took with, schools like Wharton and Stanford, because I realized that maybe they might value those aspects more. So yeah, those are the three sort of things that the admissions officers conveyed to me, and hopefully that helps you guys as well.
Yes, I remember your Stanford application, and it was one of the ones we worked on last, because each prompt is difficult in and of itself. I mean, I think we spent 2 sessions on 5 words. But I think it was at New Year's Eve when we were doing like a final read through, and we were just laughing. I couldn't stop laughing, and it was indeed the most unguarded, clear voice of just letting yourself be yourself, and they said yes.
Yeah,
and emphatically, in fact. And I'm so glad that you got to have those insights from the person who made that decision. That's a rare insight. So thank you for sharing that.
for sure.
Great. Peter, you've been with Aadit longer than I have, right? He kind of grew up with Hale. So do you have any questions for our friend here before we get to those on our Q&A board?
I do have one question, and I highly encourage everyone who is attending to type your questions in the Q&A box, and I will call on you and you can ask them directly to Aadit or to Angie or to myself. But I think one experience, the journey from being deferred to ultimately being accepted to both Wharton and Stanford, and then the subsequent journey of deciding between the two. I'd like to hear more about that, because I was there for parts of the journey, the critical parts, but however, I remember the conversation that we had together where I said that I was not at all, feeling pessimistic about your chances of being accepted to Wharton or to any other school. Every single student I've had for the last 4 or 5 years that was accepted to Stanford or Harvard that had applied early had been deferred. So for me, it's something I see every year, and it's something, very normal. But I don't know how comforting the conversation was that we had, but how did you, you thought maybe this guy's just saying that because he has to say that, otherwise we're going to go crazy. But for example, how did you process that? And then how did you try to deal, effectively with the anxiety and the stress from December 15th to April 1st, which was obviously the stretch of time between getting the initial deferral and then the ultimate set of acceptances?
Right. Yeah. So for sure, I remember that conversation. And so, I think I got deferred December 15th, 2019, and I remember, obviously, there's a little bit of pain there. It stings, the initial sort of sting it does suck a little bit. But
a little bit.
yeah, and you feel that, you definitely feel that sting for like, 2-3 days. But I remember our first reaction was to come and meet Peter. Like our knee-jerk reaction, and I think this is sort of everybody who goes through this process, is like, what's wrong, with the application, or like, maybe there's maybe this essay isn't as riveting as it should be, or maybe this extracurricular shouldn't be there, or we just tend to speculate. And so we really came to Peter, my family and I, so we could maybe speculate. That's what we were initially expecting. We wanted to figure out what went wrong, sort of do a post-mortem. But the first thing that I remember that Peter sort of reminded me, and that I should have really reminded myself as well, is that I was not rejected from the school, and it was definitely not over. And so that was number one. That sort of helped me, realize that the game is still on. But what I realized more is that, speaking to Peter, obviously, and there are tons of anecdotes of people who have been in similar situations. It's that, different schools have got different priorities at different times, right? And it's definitely not in a lot of applicants' hands if they don't fit into one of those priorities. And so you could be the most exceptional candidate. Like, you could be right there. You could have all the things working for you, but you might just not fit in like a priority of the school. And so then they tend to maybe, put you off a little later in their application process. So that was definitely the first thing that helped me cope with the anxiety. The second sort of, so the third thing that really helped me push through was, and like this again was reflected at Hale, with Angie and with Peter. It's just that the drive to sort of push yourself to the end of the game, because there's the last 2 weeks here, and even though you've had this sort of deferral, the game is not over yet. And if you really push yourself these 2 weeks, you can do something about it, right? And so we tend to really I chose to maybe postpone my despair until after there was nothing I could do about it. But as long as there was something I could do about it, as long as there was one more essay I could edit, or one more interview I could prepare for, I was like, okay, there's still things that can be done. So I guess what I would say is, don't speculate, because there are thousands of things that went wrong, and there are not thousands of things that go wrong. It's just that sometimes you don't fit in with priorities, and instead of maybe looking at your application and saying what went wrong, it's more of sort of it's more about how, like, I don't know how to articulate this, but that's never a healthy process, especially after that you've put your best foot forward. And so have a little faith in yourself. And I think Peter kept reminding me of this as well. And so have faith, don't speculate, and keep pushing as long as there's something that you can do about it. And those are the 3 things that really helped me to definitely a very difficult time, stressful time. Yeah, for sure.
Incredible. I know it was very difficult, but the road to success is paved with challenges, right? And I think about Jack Ma, who was rejected from every job he applied to. He applied to KFC to work in the kitchen. They took 22 out of the 23 applicants. He was the only one that they did not take, which is unbelievable, but he never gave up. He had been rejected by Harvard 9 or 10 times. I can't remember exactly how many times, but now he's one of the most successful businessmen in the world. And it's that ability to just keep getting back up when you get knocked down that I think really determines a true champion. The second question, my final question, would be just about, okay, you finally were accepted to Wharton, excitement, euphoria, but then you find out a few days later that you got into Stanford, right?
Yeah, I was ready to be done,
But you weren't. And that take us through, because you applied early decision to Wharton. That means you would have gotten, if you had gotten in, you would have rescinded all your applications to every other institution. But now you had another decision to make, And I don't think it was quite as easy. I think many attendees might think, oh, automatically, I'm going to go to Stanford because it's the most competitive, most selective university in America. But that also wasn't the case with you.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think, yeah, there's something that I honestly never considered during my application process was what happens after you get it. Like I didn't really even like visualize that process, and it's always important. It's always important to start thinking about that now. And so I think one of the most important factors is when you obviously get these acceptances. There's euphoria, and there's celebration and things like that. But something that Peter and Andy emphasized, and that I really found helpful, was that get started immediately on like every sort of pro and con that you can find. What I found is that a lot of people defer their final decision, and then it ends up getting very stressful towards the deadline of when you're supposed to make your decision. And so I was fortunate enough. I started much earlier. I started day off, 20 minutes after I got accepted. But I also didn't want to fall into the trap of going to the most prestigious or going to the most selective school. For me and for a lot of people, it was about the overlying culture. And so I knew there was definitely a reason that I had applied to Wharton early decision. After all, I was ready to make that commitment. And I if going back, I don't think I would have changed anything about that commitment. But what I really did, and I did it on a deeper level, was I explored the culture of both schools. And the way I did that was I spoke to a lot of alumni. I spoke to a lot of current students. I read blog posts, sort of unfiltered sources of information, because a catalog of a college is not really going to tell you the worst parts about that college, but like a blog post might. And so I spent a lot of time gauging the culture, and that was definitely one aspect. And there are things that we also tend to overlook. It might seem stupid now, but things like weather, things like location, those, like, people just like you're not gonna choose a school because of weather or location, but like absolutely, the fact that Stanford was right there in San Francisco, right next to Silicon Valley. For me, at least, that was very important. That location was one of the most defining aspects of my decision. And besides sort of culture, location, decision, there are things like academics. And so I obviously, I did a lot of research into the academics, and I found that for me, at least in terms of my interests, there was a lot more academic freedom at Stanford than there was at a school like the University of Pennsylvania. Stanford is more liberal arts. It's not really divided into certain schools. Some schools are. And so all of these things, although I knew them, I wish I had done a little bit more research before I started my final decision process, because that would have been critical in the application process as well. If I had known that, Wharton was more of a focused school, like if it was a heavier pre-professional school, which of course I knew, but if I had spoken to more students who were there on campus experiencing it on a day-to-day basis, the way I would have appealed to that school and the way I would have worked towards that school would have altered. And so definitely those things. And so in the terms of the final decision-making process, start early as you can. Take things like even the superficial factors like weather and location, they're super important. And don't fall into the trap of just picking the most prestigious school. Like I knew a lot of people who said, like people who worked on Wall Street, who said Wharton all the way, and then some people were like Stanford all the way, because different people have different values associated with that name. But I sort of decided to relinquish that and just find the community that would be the most beneficial for what I wanted to pursue. And so at the end of the day, although it was marginal, because I would have been definitely extremely happy if I was going to Wharton as well. But I decided to pick Stanford because, like I said, academic freedom, like location, the weather in California, and sort of the overlying entrepreneurial spirit on campus. So yeah, those are the things that I took into account.
Incredible insight. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to open the floor now to questions from the attendees, but just before I do that, if anyone here is zooming in and would like to know more about how Hale can help, we do offer an initial consultation to all students and families at no charge. Please let us know. We've now had Stanford acceptances 7 years in a row, so Aadit is number 7. Very proud of that track record. Hopefully we'll make it 8 next year. And really appreciate your time, Aadit. Thank you sincerely, and your time. I'm going to call on the individuals who asked the questions, and I will unmute you. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, and some of them are anonymous. For the anonymous ones, I will just read them out. So the first question or two comes from Dhruv. So Dhruv, I'm going to unmute you and you can ask away.
Hi, Aadit.
Hey.
Can you please tell me the 5 words that you wrote in your Stanford 5-word essay?
Oh, okay. That's a fun question. Let me actually pull this up right now. I have it up. I will open this. And so, yeah, if for those of you who don't know, there's a sort of a semi-famous prompt at Stanford, essay prompt, which is, 5 words that best describe you. Oh, this is a little embarrassing. Yeah, sure. I guess I was sort of going, for some context, I was sort of going for like a humorous, not very serious personality. And so that's sort of the context. And so don't take these at face value, because they're supposed to be a little satirical and non-serious. And so the 5 words that best describe me were suave, smooth, sophisticated, spiffy, and stupendous. So yeah, those are the
Nice.
yes, I hope that helps you. I guess that resonated with my personality. So yeah.
Right. And also, when did you start working with Hale?
Yeah, so I started working with Hale from around end of sophomore year, towards the end of sophomore year, I think 2 years ago. So yeah, that was probably when I started working with Hale.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhruv. Great questions. Excellent. We have an anonymous question now that I'm just going to read out loud. And that question is, how do you find a way to demonstrate your passion when there are no physical opportunities near you? Interesting question.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question, actually. That was sort of a dilemma that I faced. Obviously, things have changed a little bit now, but in terms of my school and the environment that I surrounded myself on an everyday basis, there were not really many opportunities for entrepreneurship, for fundraising or incubating an idea. And so I was definitely in a similar dilemma where I really had this passion for entrepreneurship, but I didn't have brick and mortar opportunities near me. And so first thing I would say is you really need to build a self-starting spirit. Obviously, it'll be harder than if you had, an opportunity right then and there to demonstrate your passion. But having a self-starting spirit sometimes helps you learn more, and is also just a much more favorable activity to have. Rather than just taking advantage of an opportunity, it's always better to create your own opportunity and then scale that. And so, for example, if you're passionate about debate, but then there are no debate opportunities near you, start a debate tournament. Organize a debate tournament, or start a debate club. And so these are things you always have yourself, and so you are your best opportunity, like if that makes any sense. So yeah, definitely take it upon yourself. If you're interested in science, write your own independent research paper on physics, for example. I know people who have done that, or critique a research paper in your own way and send it out to professors in universities. So these are sort of the things that you can do to really to show your passion when there are no opportunities near you. I know, specifically in the time we are in right now during the coronavirus pandemic, some of you might be feeling, overwhelmed with how do I get my extracurriculars off the ground. What I would say is that this could actually be a prime opportunity, not only to build strong extracurriculars, but also to show admissions officers that, even with the sort of despair and uncertainty of the coronavirus pandemic, you were able to persevere through it. And so I would really encourage any of you who are considering working on an extracurricular to really push through and to really try your best to make this time count, because it will really matter when you're applying. And so again, why don't, like, I know people who are passionate about debate, started an online debate society, people who made research papers during free time. So take advantage of this and definitely try your best to persevere and be a self-starter.
Great. Angie, I think you have some insight too that you can share with your students. What are some of your students doing to stay active during COVID? What are some of the creative ways that they are engaging in extracurriculars?
Yeah, that's I was like probably nodding furiously as I was explaining, like, you are your best opportunity, right? And if you don't see the opportunity, make one. And the students that I'm working with right now, who like I did find it difficult to sit down when they have an idea, and they have to bring it into existence. So one student who's both learning how to develop an app so that they can deliver tutoring, like percussion instruction online. And other students absolutely engaged in independent research with faculty as well as with companies. One student reached out, his hobby is photography, though he wants to study economics. He reached out, found an internship on his own, is actually now a paid job, which is something that he can do, editing photos, creating social media content on his own outside of class. Some really interesting things going on. Someone's writing a book that they're already 3 chapters in. So students are really, like, even though they can't reach out as much as they would like to, they're definitely doing these kinds of initiatives.
Incredible. Thank you so much for your response. We have another anonymous question. How many universities did you apply to, and how many do you recommend applying to?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, how many did I apply to? I just, at one point I was just sending out applications. No, I think I applied to the United States. I also just sent out an application to the UK, even though I was not really, the United Kingdom wasn't really my environment. But I think just for the universities in the United States, I applied to 13, like counting the UCs, maybe 13 or 14. And sorry, what was the second part of that question?
How many do you recommend applying to?
Right. And so I think it obviously depends on the kind of what you're aspiring for. And so it differs. And so if you're applying to, maybe if your aspirations are like, top Ivy League schools, then it might make sense to apply to more universities than you normally would, because, and I'm sure, like you'll go through this with Peter and Angie as well. You have your reaches, you have your matches, and you have your safeties, and you need to have a good amount of all of those. And so for anybody, even if, like, whether you're a Nobel laureate or you're just a normal student, it's extremely difficult to get into these top universities. Nobody has a guaranteed chance with these top universities. And so if you're really aspiring to get into any of the Ivy Leagues and you want to apply to all of them and other top schools like Stanford or MIT, definitely consider applying to more universities. So sort of the strategy that I took as well, because a lot of the universities on my list were difficult to get into. And I tried my best to counter that. Maybe I didn't do it as successfully as I should have. But I definitely tried to counter those universities with a fair amount of universities that were easier to get into, schools that had a safer acceptance rate. And so at the end of your admission season, even if everything goes wrong, you still have a great choice at the end of it. And so it depends on your aspirations, and definitely make sure that you have a good amount of universities that you have a good chance of getting into. But and so yeah, it varies. But definitely, I think if Peter and Angie could also weigh in on this, but maybe 12 to 16, or maybe a little bit more than that, 12 to 18, or 14 to 18, usually is the sweet spot for international kids that I've noticed, at least.
Angie, what do you think? 18 universities, is that too much in your opinion?
Students who have a need for scholarships should be applying for 18. Students who just kind of want it or trying to be really strategic about it, 18 is a lot, because, Aadit, if you remember, most students who apply to 12, they would write about 30 essays. Stanford
Right.
alone has 11. Columbia, Princeton, Yale, they've got 8, 9.
I'm getting anxiety just like this.
Yeah, it just like see, it's like you've already blanked out the process. So to be strategic, to pick the ones that you know are actually the match, right? Because some of the schools on your list you contorted, right? You were trying to hide the businessmen in you, even though it was very loud and clear. Right. But you made good cases and things like that. So it's like 18 is a lot when you are aspiring to the highest, because you have to write compelling. It's like, the quality of the work that needs to go into it would demand being a little bit more strategic. But yeah, some students, they need to apply to more because they're looking for scholarships or they're looking to spread out the strategy. But usually about 10 to 12 to do the quality writing necessary.
And there are some universities that don't have prompts and things like that. And so those are
those are the beautiful ones.
Yeah. Those are the ones that you just
we like those. We like those too.
Incredible. I think we might have one last question from an anonymous attendee. How did you manage to get your idea off the ground? I think they're talking about carpool. And how did you become your own opportunity? Interesting.
Right. So I think that's a great question. Something that a lot of kids, especially people, who are starting off this entire process, trying to build extracurriculars, is something that I get quite often. And so for GoPool, especially, starting off as maybe a kid with, maybe a 15-year-old kid with an idea, no particular experience, no accolades to sort of back up the validity of my idea. It definitely seems daunting, and it was. There's no doubt about it. What I would say is how you get your idea off the ground is any idea, not only like purely startup based, you a research idea or anything. This applies to almost any idea you might have. Your first and foremost step is to get feedback, to start the ideation process, speak to people who know more about the industry or the sector or whatever field you're working in. Speak to people who know that field better than you do. And so when I started off with my carpooling app, I sent out emails, cold emails, no connections, nothing. Just cold emails to, deputy secretaries of transportation for Dubai or a government official in the KHDA. And so I would speak with them. I would get a better understanding of, the space that I'm working in from people who knew a lot more about it than I did. And I also spent a lot of time speaking to people I was targeting. So I think especially in the first year, I might have spoken to maybe 300, 350 parents. And so, it's not really the glamorous phase of any idea. It's never really the glamorous phase of any initiative, but ideation is your most, like the foremost step that really sets you up for success. And always make sure that you put your idea down onto paper, make it in a presentable format. So that was sort of the first step. After that, what I did is, the second part is really the perseverance part, where, you're going to get a lot of, for me, at least on my journey, that involved a lot of emails, a lot of cold calling, trying to get an organization, a bank or law firm, anything to look at this idea and fund it. And so that was definitely difficult. And I did get rejected a lot of times, and I made tons of presentations that didn't amount to anything. But like Angie and Peter keep emphasizing as well, is that you just have to keep pushing through, persevere. Maybe you need funding, maybe you need a professor's validation. It's about getting to as many opportunities as you can, pushing yourself to make these opportunities happen, because you're not going to find a bank who's looking to give people money, right? You're going to have yourself make that opportunity for yourself. And so you really need to, and don't, obviously having a connection is great, and, leveraging that is phenomenal, but don't despair if you have none, because oftentimes just pushing yourself as much as possible will usually get you where you want to go. And so that's step 2. And then after that, the rest is the fun part, which is using that money and building out the idea and then scaling it to people. And I'm sure you'll find plenty of people on the way who'll help you with that. And so I would say work on ideation a lot, and persevere through the inevitable rejections when you ask for funding or validation or whatever, and make sure you keep the people you meet close. So the experts you meet, or the people who know a lot about this, make sure you keep them close. So when you eventually do build out your product or your idea, and you're getting into the development and the scaling phases, they're around you to really guide you through this process. And so that was sort of my journey that could really definitely help you. That's how you become your own opportunity.
Unbelievable response, unbelievable story, incredible narrative. I'd just like to ask each of you, starting with Angie, for a closing thought for all those younger students who are zooming in, who want to be like Aadit one day. Want to grow up to be like Aadit.
Yeah.
What thoughts do you have, Angie? And then we'll close out with Aadit.
Oh my gosh. Regardless of what it is that you want to study, regardless of what those connections and dreams and ideas that you have in your mind, I think one of the things that I love about Aadit, and that I also learned from his story, because he's as a teenager, he's done things that made me sit down as an adult and reevaluate my own life choices, right? Because he has the true entrepreneur, becoming your own opportunity. And I think that is the key lesson. And we have these conversations a lot as consultants, Peter, where we're working with, some young students who have an idea, and you have to go through the impact feasibility matrix with them about, okay, which of your ideas is going to be worth your time at this moment, and working on little project plans and big project plans, and goal setting skills and project management skills. But at the end of the day, it's like, what is your story? What is your opportunity? And how can you challenge yourself to take something you love and really chase it, whatever it is? And when you're not afraid to take those risks, and you're not afraid to hear no because you believe something that others don't, you will succeed.
Beautiful.
You will.
Incredible. Unbelievable. Thank you. That was amazing, Angie. And Aadit, the man of the hour, closing thoughts.
Sure, yeah. I think if there's anything that you take away from this, obviously other than the phenomenal things that Angie and Peter have mentioned as well, it would be that the one defining characteristic about this process is whether or not you truly believe in yourself and you're willing to bet on yourself, like Angie mentioned. But it goes a little bit beyond that, where I'm more than certain that there must be some of you out there, maybe all of you, everybody goes through this at some point, where you're at a low point, seriously considering, would I be able to make it to this university, or am I really cut out for this, or I'm sure there are better applicants. But it really comes down to whether you believe in yourself, especially during those low points, whether that's when you get deferred after you apply early, or whether that's in your sophomore year where you get grades that you really weren't expecting. It's just about that ability to believe in yourself, pick yourself up, and to really push yourself through difficult times like this one, the one that the world is facing today, that really sets you apart from everyone else. So have faith in yourself. If you didn't get that grade or if you think freshman year is holding you back academically, trust me when I say this, that giving yourself a chance and believing that you will make that chance work is the most difficult step to a phenomenal journey. And so I think anyone aspiring to anything, don't be afraid to aspire for things that seem out of reach. Because to me, honestly, and I think Peter will tell you this as well, was that when I walked into his office end of sophomore year, not really feeling all that great, and he asked me where I wanted to go to college, I said, I'm thinking of I was really quiet because I was kind of embarrassed. I was thinking I would really like to go to Stanford. And so although I didn't believe in myself back then, and it seemed like this invisible fortress that no one gets into back then, it was just that having that community at Hale, at home, at school, that believed in you, and having yourself believe in yourself, it really worked wonders, and it would work wonders for everyone. So yeah. And also, sorry, to end that, if any of you have any other questions, you can feel free to email me. adit.p@hotmail.com. I'll sort of just type this in there if anyone has any extra questions. Feel free to email me. I'll get back to you ASAP.
Thank you so much. Very generous with your time, your insight, your experiences. That was absolutely amazing. We really appreciate both of your time, Aadit and Angie. Thank you everybody for attending. We will see you next week with another student. Aadit, please invite me to the IPO party for the next startup. I'll be on the yacht celebrating with you.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Yes.
And, looking forward to seeing you continue your journey at Stanford and beyond. We'll still be here. I can promise you that.
And I'll see you in a few days to walk through the visa process.
And
Not quite the IPO party.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you. Bye-bye.